So in the beginning, I would like to talk about ownership of Mintos and all the companies that are related to it. But maybe give a short background, like who came up with the idea about Mintos and how was it financed in the beginning?
Yeah, so the Mintos was we launched in 2015 January, but obviously we already worked on the idea before. So actually, the idea of Mintos came. I was studying at INSEAD for MBA. I did the MBA at INSEAD, so they have campuses in Singapore and Paris. My initial idea was to stay abroad, but I knew deep down that I'm going to do entrepreneurship. Then after INSEAD, I came back. I realized, okay, I much rather actually can start straight after INSEAD, and then diligently was going through the ideas what I could do. Initial idea, actually, what I wanted to do is to build venture capital fund in the Baltics. And that's, I guess, when I met you for the first time, when you were still with your company. And then after the research, we realized, okay, there's not that many companies in which to invest in. And this exposure to startups led to realization that, yes, startups is hard, but it's not something which is like not doable. So you can certainly do it, and actually you just have to start working on that. And then I was again going through the ideas. I had my list of ideas which I had gathered throughout the year at INSEAD and before. And at that time, which is 2014, peer-to-peer lending was still very new concept, very new concept. Well, today it's still very new concept. Yeah. In 2014, it was even more so. So you had the guys like Funding Circle, Lending Club, Zop, like Prosper in the US, and other players out there. And then I remember very well how the trigger happened. I was reading one of the articles on TechCrunch, and I read an article about actually platform called Landbay in the UK, and that's where our first idea actually came, that hey, this angle of loans backed by real estate is something which makes more sense, and this is something which we could create here in the Europe and start from the Baltics, where I'm originally come from. So our first idea was a typical P2P platform. We originated loans ourselves, so we issued loans to the borrowers, then placed on platform and offered for investors to invest in. We launched 2015 January, then very soon after realized, okay, this is good business, like it's a good business model, but there's much better model and much more need, to be honest, for creating a marketplace which any lending company can use. Because if you look from the market perspective, it doesn't make sense on both sides. On one side, all the lending companies, they are seeking for the funding sources, so they need funding. But for all of them to create their own platforms kind of doesn't make sense. And then what happens, even if they create their own platform, investors are the same investor base, so they compete for the same investors. And then basically the same problems on the investor side. If I go to all of those platforms, I have to register with each of those. I have to go through whatever AML checks. I have to transfer money, manage them. It's a lot of work. So what we thought that actually makes a lot of sense just to create a marketplace where there's tons of investors who can actually then choose from tons of different loan supply. And that's how Mintos became what it is today. So we basically launched in 2015 January, but then we rewrote most of the code and relaunched as Mintos stands today. I would say something like mid 2015. September was something when we definitely already had a clear focus on what we do now.
On the marketplace.
On the marketplace, yeah.
And how was it financed?
So the funding is, I was in a very privileged situation that I could actually get the funding before we started. So after this TechCrunch kind of trigger came, so first thing what I thought, okay, well, it's a good idea, but obviously straight out of the MBA, and I had a lot of student debt, like a lot. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to fund it. And if you build a financial product, it's not your app, which is fairly kind of doesn't require that much capital to build, because your first MVP can be fairly like basic. If you deal with finance and when it comes to investment, so it cannot be basic. So you really have to invest in building the platform. So I was in a very privileged situation that I actually could get the commitment from which became our equity investors before we started. So I knew the guys from my undergrad, the guys which had sold the previous company, so they were part with For Finance, so they had sold the For Finance, and I knew that they are investing in different companies, so I just reached out to them and said, hey, I have this idea, what do you think? And they knew the space, well, at that time much better than me, with all the alternative lending companies and so forth. They said, oh, I see, great idea. And they committed already before we started, they committed that they will be ready to fund up to even like €1 million. And then afterwards, when we started, they topped it up to say to €2 million, what they were ready to commit to invest in.
The most recent financing, it's also done by the same guys.
It also came from the same guys. So we were thinking, yeah, well, we could go out and raise from venture capital like funds, but then again, so the expertise what comes from the equity investors which you have is you cannot get the same from venture capital. So they don't know the space that well. So obviously, like in early days, having these guys with experience in building the lending companies, it was tremendously helpful. So these days, well, they're like barely involved in the business, but in early days, obviously, I got a lot of advice, and the other Martin, so we got a lot of advice from them. So the first round, which we closed, was like 2 million seed round, which was from these guys. It's 4 guys, for what you could call angel investors, or whatever you call them. And then the second, what we call Series A, was 5 million round, which we also raised from the same guys.
Can you mention them by name?
Yeah, it's basically 4 guys. It's we updated also our About Us page. It actually should be.
It's now on the site as well?
It's basically 4 guys. It's Aigars Kesenfels, Māris Keiš, Alberts Pola, and Kristaps Ozils. So it's never been that we are kind of hiding exactly who they are, but well, of course they have
for some it might
they have
seem
their
so,
private life as well, and that they are angel investors. But well, there's nothing holds us from being transparent about that, and this is now on About Us page as well.
Okay, that's good. Another question: can you comment on the structure of Mintos legal entities? So I've seen it's Mintos Marketplace, Mintos Holdings, Mintos Finance.
Yeah. So as with any service, so there's a bunch of things which we offer, and then to provide the service or the product as it is, there are several legal entities involved, and then we have the main entity is Mintos Holdings, so that's our main entity, Mintos entity, and then there are daughter companies there. So we have companies which are holding all the technical IP, then we have local legal entities to employ local people in Germany. So we have a German entity, we have a Polish entity, we have an entity in Mexico, we have the financing entity. So there's a bunch of legal entities. So basically just for the sake of managing the risks, and also
and all of them go under Mintos Holdings?
Yeah, Mintos Holdings is...
and what about Mintos Marketplace?
It's one of the daughter companies, so it's Mintos Holdings is on top, and then Mintos Marketplace
it's also under Mintos Holdings.
Mintos Marketplace is 100% owned by Mintos Holdings.
Okay, got it. Then I had a question about who owns Mintos and how has it changed over the years, but you kind of answered already, right? It's for investors.
You can look at us like in a very typical startup, with a caveat, of course, that we could raise money before we started, so our equity investors took a decent chunk when we raised money from them, right? But it's been the guys who invested, angel investors, then it's me and the other Martin's co-founder who have a decent chunk of Mintos, and then we also give stock options to all the employees, so all the 200 people which we employ, and we still continue to give also to the newcomers today, and we'll continue to give stock options, so they also have a good portion. Of course, each by themselves maybe less so, but as a total, they have a good portion of Mintos as well through stock options.
And do you plan to somehow inform like what's the shares between the owners of Mintos, or no?
I mean, we are a private company, right? So also whenever we issue a new stock option, so our kind of cap table changes, and basically we believe that there's not going to be much value of like putting exact like percentage. So this is one of the things which is also a misconception. Is the same. Aigars Kiesenfels, like people say, yeah, well he owns like whatever, like 100%. Like absolutely not true. Yeah, he's one of the ultimate beneficial owners. Which if we look at the which we have to report to the State Revenue Service or to the company register, to be more precise. That means that he has more than 25%, but nobody asks that he actually...
And no one else has.
Exactly,
right?
Nobody else has, and nobody actually asks that actually he owns much less than 50% of the Mintos. So he's like one of the equity investors and has put decent kind of money into this, but obviously there's many other, including me and other Martins.
But so it's then between 25 and 50?
50, yeah.
So he couldn't alone like make decisions that would influence everything. So
it's the same as, look, if you raise the money from venture capital, you're gonna have a board. So we also do have a board. So obviously they can, what they can influence is obviously who runs the company, for instance. So and that's also me, part of the shareholder.
Of course.
And if there is somebody who could do the job better than me as a CEO, I'm happy to hand over. Yeah. If you ask me like today, I think actually that there's like most likely I can do it. It's the best. But how we have structured, so I'm the CEO of the company, so I have the most information. I have access to all of what we do, right? And then I do the final decisions. Obviously, whenever there's like more strategic decision, I'm going to consult with our board, like equity investors, obviously. But this is like on very, very.
Well, I guess from outside it kind of
case.
looked like that Aigars would own, like you said, like I don't know, 90% or whatever, like that he has full control of the company, and because it's not like shared anywhere. Like,
we understand. We understand it like might look like that, and that's also one reason why we're happy to talk about that. That it is not the case, and there's like a good corporate governance and this notion of somebody owning the company and then controlling it 100%. I think it's very kind of provincial thinking that somebody who owns it. Then if you look at any of the startups, you also gonna find venture capital funds who owns more than 25% of the company, even in later stage or in earlier stage, you're gonna give up even like 30% of the company easily, right? But that doesn't mean that they control the business. So to actually manage the business day in, day out, so that's where I come into play as the CEO and one of the co-founders, and the other Martin. So that's also how we have set it up here.
Yeah. Okay. Can you comment about HippoCredit? So I saw that you and Martin Scholters are listed there as members of the council, and that it previously was named Mintos.
So this is the company which. Basically, this goes back to the story that when we launched, we were the typical P2P lender, and the originator, or basically the company, was HippoCredit, which was then issuing the loans and then placing them on the marketplace, and they also had the marketplace, right? And then afterwards, when we pivoted, so we changed our business model, so we separated the two companies. We said, okay, HippoCredit is gonna be just a regular loan originator, and then we're gonna focus on Mintos. And then together with our equity investors, we decided, okay, because we don't really focus on loan origination, this is not our business. So Mintos business is really technology infrastructure to build the marketplace. Then we also sold the HippoCredit to another equity investor, and then we remained with a small stake in the HippoCredit, like very small actually, and we remained as a kind of supervisory board member, passive shareholder, and then obviously, because I was from day one involved with this origination, and the other Martins as well, so we set the same credit scoring model, we set the operations here in Latvia, so we can help with our advice as a supervisory board members, but our involvement is basically, I don't know, once a half year maybe, so it's very low. Believe me, there's so much to do with Mintos, so HippoCredit is not something I spend too much time on.
Are there any other loan originators on Mintos, or where you and Martin Scholters are
No,
of involved or no?
we are not.
That's the only one.
This is the only one, and then the rest is basically through our equity investors, our angel investors. They have invested also in other companies, and those are what we would then say on the website. There's where the equity ownership overlaps. There's some overlap, but there again, I think what is kind of misconception that the same whatever Aigars holds 100% of all of them, which is also again not true. Of course, I cannot speak exactly about like the percentages there, but what the investors have to realize, he's just one of the equity investors. There's many other. And not only those who invested in Mintos, but also many others who are not part of Mintos, so the structures are very different. So this overlap of equity obviously is there, so we are very open about that and never try to hide about that and be shy. But that definitely doesn't affect how we deal on day-to-day basis, because it's on the market terms, and all of those companies, they have their own business, so they have their own agenda. So it doesn't mean that they're gonna 100% use Mintos because, well, there's some overlap of equity holders. Not at all. So many of them are looking, the same logo. So they have a very different thinking how they should build the funding profile, and they go for the same bond issues and so forth. So it's a very different relationships with many of them.
Of course, they are completely different companies, different shareholders, and so on. But I think the biggest issue is that you have a very small side note somewhere listed that some shareholders overlap. But there was recently an article in Estonian news, and it claimed that the platform provided loans of more than 4.5 billion, but investors are unaware that nearly half of the money that goes there to Aigars Kestenfelds again, and he's mentioned as owner of Mintos, but okay, the shareholder of Mintos. And when I took a look, I think I found like some 13 originators that are on Mintos,
affiliated,
somehow connected to him.
7 out of 65. That's where there's some affiliation either.
Well, I can like.
It depends on the group. So some of them are part of the group as well. So
Mogo, Hippo Credit, Lendo, Banknote, Finco, Sun Finance, Express Credit, Peachy, Tigo, Monego, Credo, Zenka.
Yeah, the last one, they are part of the group. So that's
three of them were Finiterra. And I guess the issue maybe not that Aigars owns everything and controls everything, but like in this Estonian article, it was mentioned that people or investors might believe that there is super big diversification, and actually,
but the thing is that
a big part of companies are connected to one guy.
Yeah, but the thing again here is that what we believe is that even though there's some shareholder overlap, so at the end of the day, what investors are funding, they are funding the originated loans. Sure, there are the buyback entities and so forth, but what we have to realize that if the loans are performing 100%, then none of the buyback guarantee comes into the play, right? So at the end of the day, what we look from diversification perspective is what is the underlying loan I buy, and there's like no notion of not being diversified if we speak about the same like groups which are some overlap of shareholders. Well, the loan originated in Armenia, of course, performs so much different than the loan originated in whatever, like Kenya or somewhere else. It's just like totally different loan, and the correlation is not there, even though there is overlap of shareholders. Well, the loan of which I buy is to the final borrower in say Kenya or the final borrower in Armenia. So what I'm concerned about is how they perform. If they're going to perform, all going to go, I'm going to get back my capital and interest on top of that.
Then we come back to one project that maybe Aigars was involved in or not. Do you know anything about OptiTrade 24?
No.
It was mentioned in Latvian news as a potentially scam project from Russia. It promised huge guaranteed returns, and it was said that it's connected to Aigars Kestenfelds and Armons Broks.
No,
so you have no idea about this project, and the thing that was mentioned there was that it ended really bad in 2016. It shut down. Investors lost millions. And now, when some peer-to-peer platforms in Baltics are having issues and they're also like kind of disappearing, so I mean, this kind of news is not someone would like to read about Mintos or Trino shareholders. So,
yeah, and I think this is typical crisis situation that you're trying to find any whatever thing which is like barely related or not. But well, if you ask me, I don't know about this specific case.
But do you think
Cannot
Aigars would be able to comment on it at some point? Or?
Yeah, well, you can ask him.
Well, I don't have his contacts, but you would be able to ask him that or share his contacts.
I think how we think about that is, well, we deal with our business, and then this I can talk a lot about Mintos and what we do. So but, well, we have different persons and different whatever entities which then are equity investors, and obviously we cannot comment about what all of them are doing. So, but to my knowledge, so I don't know this case. So sounds not something which I would be. I would say that doesn't make sense to me, but I don't know actually.
Okay. In Explore P2P review of Mintos, there is an interesting question: can Finiterra afford to buy back 8 million of Monego's bad loans? And of course, in this case, shareholders like Aigars are in both sides, Mintos and Monego, and so there was a promise that these bad loans, these late loans, would be bought back, but there are some delays. And any insights on that?
Yeah. I would again go away just like everything is Aigars. So it's we have to look at the Finiterra group, which has a different shareholder structure. It's a lot of guys, it's the same like management involved and so forth. So it's a whole separate company with like a few hundred people, if not more, right? So Finiterra is a bigger group. Monego is part of that. Obviously, Moldova case was unexpected, so nobody really expected, including themselves. But what for them, Moldova or Monego is just part of much bigger organization, right? So for them, this 8 million, well, in absolute terms, it's a big money, but that's like when you look at the total portfolio, I don't know by heart exactly, but it's not that big part of the total portfolio. And then also on top of that, so what we have agreed with them is that they buy back or provide the buyback for those loans which go into 60 days past due, right? Yeah. And then that's also the Kosovo case. Also, when the liquidator was assigned, so liquidator is still administrator of the case, so they still actually collect money from the borrowers. So all that money also then goes to Finiterra finally at the end of the day. So it's more about cash flow management, like between receiving those funds from administrator and then between actually those loans reaching 60 plus days past due. So I think that's my comment on this.
Basically, it's only about cash flow, and you think that the promise will be kept and everything will be fine there.
That's our current agreement and understanding for the case. And then the same is with Utah, the same. So exactly the same as Utah. So there's no difference there.
Okay, got it.
What we have to realize is just local problem of much bigger loan originator groups, and obviously for them, Mintos is one of the funding source, and well, they are also pretty smart about that, so they understand if something can happen in one country and they cannot really stand behind that, then well, the whole group is affected, and obviously they don't want to affect the whole group and make a case when investors would not trust that they can stand behind local problems.
Okay, got it. And then the last question about Aigars. In Latvia, he's shareholder of about 100 companies, so I guess he's super busy managing all of his investments. But I mean, for many Mintos investors, like there is a big interest about him, and I mean, you probably have noticed that as well. And do you think that investors could expect that he becomes a bit more public, or does some interviews or appearances in, I don't know, P2P conference in Riga or some other events?
I think again the best is to ask him personally, so I cannot speak on behalf of somebody else, right? So I think he's, at least so far, his style has been that he's more kind of a shareholder and financial investor, whatever, like an angel investor, call it whatever you want, or be involved. And at least like with Mintos, so there's clear segregation, like what is Mintos, who's running the Mintos, and then who are the guys who provide the funding for that. So most likely it wouldn't make much sense for him to appear in like P2P conference, because most of the things, well, I guess he gets to know about, I don't know, the same us launching the mobile app, the same as all the other investors. So he's very like
well, I mean case. More in terms as like providing some kind of assurance to retail investors that he's real, alive, and approachable in some way. I don't know, yeah. So stuff like that.
I see your point, but then again, I mean, look, next year maybe we go out and we raise funding from the venture capital from, I don't know, one of the top tier funds, whatever. Let's call what we could raise from. Say Index Ventures, which invested in Revolut, right? So, well, we're not going to bring Index Ventures to the P2P conference to show that they're real. So, I mean, that's venture capital. It can change all the time, and what I would look at, that's basically where we get the capital. So that's our angel investors. Well, everybody can find out about who they are. But obviously, like in the day-to-day business or operations, well, they are not that much involved. So. Okay. I guess it wouldn't make much sense if you ask me.
Okay.
If we would have had raised from, I don't know, Change Ventures here in Latvia, would we then ask Change Ventures to come on the P2P conference? Most likely not. So
yeah, but I mean, these guys appear anyway in events. And
no, I see your point. Of course, I see your point. Yeah.
Then I have a couple of questions about guarantees and safety. So some loan originators have also issued bonds that in general provide more safety and higher yield. What is the value of making investments on Mintos in individual loans and not in these bonds?
I would first, I would not necessarily say that the bonds are always safer, because also depending on the structure which we use, actually could be the case, and also depend on the bonds which are issued. In some cases, the bonds are very unsecured bonds, so you basically don't have any security. And then when you buy on Mintos, so either you're going to hold the underlying loan itself, or then you have a pledge on the loans, or basically there's a security, so you always have some additional security. So I wouldn't necessarily say that bonds are more safe than the investing in specific loan. Then what is the benefit? I think is that a number of benefits. The first one is that actually bonds are not accessible to most of investors. So to invest in bonds, usually you need quite a bit of money. So it can be 10,000 euros when you can just participate in the bond, or it can be for some bonds even 100,000 euros. For some bonds it can be also 1,000 euros, but that's more like exception. So usually it's pretty high entry point to actually get to those bonds. And then second is that the bonds liquidity is very different. So if you compare to Mintos, so at Mintos when you go and buy a specific loan, then you can start very small and actually buy a bunch of loans, right? So that's as compared to the bonds where your entry point is high. And then liquidity, if you want to get out of the bonds, so many of the bonds are thinly traded, they are not that active market, whereas for loans actually on Mintos, secondary market is very active. And we've seen cases when people actually, I think one of investors tested with 1 million euros. They wanted to get out to sell, and they actually sold it in 24 hours. So there's a lot of liquidity in Mintos secondary market. So that's also the difference, in my opinion. And then also just the risk profile. So when you give the bond, or when you buy a bond, then you are basically giving the loan to the company, to the lending company. Sure, they can use that money to issue loans, but likewise, maybe they can use it to whatever, spurge on some whatever natural business related stuff. So you're basically taking the underlying risk. What you take is of the lending company itself. So they can use it money, whatever, and maybe they don't perform that well with the lending, and they are whatever selling and buying cars, and this is how they make money, and that's how they can service you the bond and give back your coupon, right? When you buy loans on Mintos, then what you buy, like at the first place, is underlying exposure to the underlying asset. So what matters to you is if the loans are performing. If the loans are performing, that's it. So you can diversify and build a good portfolio. So loans performing. Sure, on top of that, those loans which are not performing, there comes a buyback guarantee. So there comes this guarantee from the loan originator, and you have to pay attention to that. But this is also kind of a misconception that, and we understand why people make those mental shortcuts that, well, I am investing in a loan originator, but at the end of the day, actually, you are investing in loans, when on top of that, yes, comes exposure also to the loan originator for the part which is non-performing loans. So if there's no non-performing loans, so actually you don't care about loan originator when it comes to buyback guarantee. You still care about them as a servicer because you need somebody who's going to collect the payments from the borrowers. But other than that, actually, it's a very different risk profile from bonds to the loans. And then, I would say it's entry point, and there's liquidity, and then diversification. So with bonds, you cannot diversify that much as compared to Mintos, where you can actually build a very diversified portfolio.
Okay. And when we talk about these actual loan agreements between the originator and ultimate borrower, is there a reason why they are not provided to investors? For example, like what protection investor would have if Mintos and the originator would disappear? So you have no idea like who have you lent the money to, right?
There are a few agreements involved. So the one agreement is between the loan originator or the lending company and the final borrower. So that's a typical loan agreement between the final borrower and the loan originator. We showed the templates of those on the website. So that's what we do. So this is the main agreement actually, so that you know that the loan has been issued. Obviously, we cannot show each and every of those, so we show the templates and so forth. Then there's to sell that loan to investors, there's an assignment agreement, which is an agreement between the investor and the loan originator. So it's just called assignment agreement, where the investor is basically buying the accounts receivables or claim rights from the loan originator. So that's a second set of agreements, so between the loan originator and investor. And the third set of agreement is between Mintos as a service provider, as a platform, and the loan originator for using the platform. So that governs our relationship, like business to business relationship with the loan originator. And that governs basically the use of the platform, all the financial covenants, like those events of defaults and so forth, and many other things. So it's whatever, like 15-page or 20-page documents. So it's pretty. Actually, these days it's much more than that. So it's pretty heavy documents. So for each of those agreement between Mintos and the loan originator, so we involve local legal advisors. We have our own legal team, which today is 10 people strong, and there goes a lot of work actually in all those legal agreements, and including the corporation agreement.
Well, for sure, but I mean, if there comes the case, like worst case scenario, Mintos goes down and then the loan originator goes down, like what happens to investors? How can they resolve or claim anything?
So investors have the assignment agreement. So for each investment investors make on their My Investments page, they have assignment agreement, which is a legal proof that they have this underlying loan claim of the loan. So that's basically all the agreements what investors have. And with those assignment agreements, in a very unfortunate and most likely unlikely case that both Mintos and loan originator would go out of business, then with those agreements they can then turn to the administrator or to the respective kind of legal bodies, and to claim their right to receive the payment which the borrower owes legally to them, because as an investor I get the claim rights over the final borrower.
Okay. Then there was one question that I was asked, can Mintos publish how much debt each originator has from other sources, and where their Mintos sourced debt falls in the hierarchy?
So we are publishing information which we get from the loan originators in forms of presentations or annual reports. Obviously, so we would want to get more and stuff, and we are in a sense at the mercy of loan originators, because many of them, again, we have to realize they are private companies, so that doesn't mean that they have like quarterly reports. Many of them are in so many different jurisdictions, so it depends when they have the annual reports, and the languages are different and so forth. So there's a lot of limiting factors, which of course today we have to realize we have 70 different lending companies from 32 different countries. So it's a lot of different.
But you, as a big
things.
Marketplace, you must have some kind of power to push them to.
Well, one
right?
is actually,
Or,
if you ask me, like none of the loan generators are even super happy to publish as a private company, even to publish their annual reports. So you cannot find them anywhere. So many of them are actually already there. We exercise what you would call our kind of power as a bigger marketplace, that we say, well, you have to publish information. So that's already a big step towards more transparency there. And then in those reports, that's where the investors could find other debt holders.
Then what about regulation?
And on top of that, actually, just coming back, what's also one thing is that some of the loan originators are also public companies, so they have publicly listed bonds. So they have to inform, they cannot just put it on Mintos and then not inform the stock exchange. So in many cases, they're actually not allowed to publish any, which would be treated as material information. So they cannot just put on Mintos if they don't do it on the stock exchange.
Okay. So Mintos is operating with billions of euro, right? But at the same time, there has been no real progress on regulation or getting any licenses. What has been the biggest challenges so far?
Regulation is very complex issue. So regulation, so when we look at the Mintos, there's again, many things which you have to take into account. One part is that all the regulation which applies to actually originating the loans to the borrower, so that those loans, and this is actually one of the most important parts of the regulation, that those loans are issued in accordance with the regulation, with the respective legislation. So all of the loan originators, they have their own permissions and license in the respective countries to issue loans to the borrowers. What those licenses and permissions, what they regulate is, and depends country by country and loan type by loan type and etc. What they regulate is at what rates you can issue the loans, what affordability checks you do, even at what time you can issue and so forth. So many different things what they regulate. Then there's the regulation which comes to what we do when we offer the investment opportunities to investors. Here, it's again, there's like rather kind of complex issue, because there's no one license which we get and then all of a sudden in all the world we can work with investors. It doesn't work like that. So we have to look with in respective countries. So and in all the countries where we do active solicitation of investors, we go in, we do the legal due diligence, we work with the local legal advisors, if necessary, get also a regulator's opinion. And then it's also going to differ country by country. So in some countries it's super regulated, such as in the UK. There's specific regulation toward that. In some countries there are bits and pieces from the current regulations, being either investment brokerage or electronic money institution and so forth. In some countries there's no specific regulation for the service as such, which is not something which should be treated as something necessarily bad, because what we have to think and realize is that in general, innovation always precedes regulation. So first comes innovation, something new.
In this sector for sure, yeah.
And then comes regulation. But it's not only in financial sector, it's also the same if you look at the same Uber. Like Uber in very early days, like zero regulation. And then all of like country by country, they put some regulation to actually regulate the market. Look at the same Airbnb. Zero regulation from day one. Now in some countries you actually have to go register that you do that. You can do it only for a certain number of days, and etc. So regulation followed. Drones. In very early days, I remember drones, like everybody could fly the drone whenever they wanted to. And then came the regulation which said, okay, you cannot do it next to the airport and so forth. So usually innovation comes before regulation. And then what happens is in most of the countries, actually the regulators are still forming approach to how to regulate this, and if at all they have to regulate. So what we do, we work with accordance with all the regulation which is out there. So in some countries it requires specific setup. In some countries there's no setup, and in some countries, such as in the UK, if we would want to solicit investors, we would need a specific permission and license, which we were in the process of getting. But then because we were very early in our stage, stage when we applied, we still had some drawbacks where the regulator decided, okay, please work on those and then we can grant you the license. So today we don't work, for instance, with the UK investors.
I mean, I understand the point about this innovation and regulation later, but still, I mean, you probably could have made some proactive steps, right?
What
or
we
maybe
do,
you are in process.
That was a good question. So, I was too keen on explaining this whole complex issue, but basically what we do to reduce any regulatory kind of uncertainties, so we now are in the final stage of getting electronic money institution license, so that's what we're going to get European wide, and then we are also now applying for investment brokerage license, and that's also European wide, which we can then passport across Europe. So those two permissions and licenses is going to actually solve a lot of regulatory kind of questions.
And when can we expect that you will get them?
Well, we would want to get them. We actually thought that we're going to get them already last year, especially electronic money institution license. But obviously, so there's the third party involved, which is regulators. So they have a lot of, in these days when there's a lot of fintechs out there, and they are, many of them are actually applying for the same license. So they actually takes their time, and unfortunately, this time is longer than we would want to see. So that really depends on their kind of capacity to go through the applications. But we are ready. We have all the platform actually when it comes to IBAN accounts and Mintos cards. So the moment we get the permission, we are more or less ready to roll out the IBAN accounts and also put Mintos card on top of that.
Okay. At the end of 2018, investors held about €6 million in cash in Mintos that wasn't invested. So how big is this cash position right now? I guess it's bigger, probably.
It is bigger, so now it's around 30 million, 27, 30 million euros.
And how is it stored?
So we have a very many partners, so we don't use just one bank, we use several banks, we also use several electronic money institutions, so we diversify. Again, like in as much as we educate investors and about diversification, this is also what we do in the business. So we work with
from Vitalis, I heard that for Euro you have 5 or 6 bank accounts.
I don't know by heart, but it's a number of them. Yeah, it's a number of them.
But I mean, if one of them goes down, I mean, if the bank goes down, then you basically lose some million of money, right?
It's not necessarily that you lose, because, well, if the bank goes out of business, it means that all of those who hold more than 100,000 euros, they lose what they had there. But obviously, it is under risk, right? But the thing there is, so we choose our partners very carefully. So we work with the same LHV in Estonia, which is a very established bank and has been around for many, many years. Obviously, that doesn't mean that they cannot have difficulties, and any bank can have difficulties. The same, like Deutsche Bank was not like in the best shape in the last few years, right? So it basically comes down to choosing your partner. So we worked with the TransferWise the same. So it's just putting your due diligence and working with the partners which you can trust. And obviously you minimize the risk, but there's always going to be some. But I would say that this is perhaps not the kind of risk which we would think that it is too high. So we would say it's very low, if anything.
But if you get any of these licenses, will that help to solve this issue? Or
electronic money institution license definitely helps. So we can then use our own company which has this license, and then in some countries you can actually store this money in the central bank. Well, again, you can argue with all the Greece and so forth that even central bank can go out of business, but in general, that's a very good setup.
Some investors are very unhappy with the implementation of delayed payments, which in some cases means that investors are lending money for weeks or months without any interest. Any plans to solve it somehow?
So pending payments is it's a necessary tool which and feature which we established. So that means that because what happens is that when loan recipients receive the money from the borrower, they send information through API to us that the money has been
that they received it, but
and then what we do is the pending payments. We're gonna put it on an account on investors only when we receive money from the loan originator, because there's some delay.
Yeah.
Obviously, they don't transact for each and every whatever 50 or 100 or even 10 or whatnot euros. They don't transfer all the payments like whenever they receive them from the borrower. So there's some delay. So with pending payments, we are solving that. Obviously, it's a first iteration. There are many things, and that's a valid feedback what the investors say. We have to improve, and we are working on that. So one of the things which we just now actually launched a few days ago was which loans are first covered with the pending payment, so that the more the loans which were older are covered first with the pending payments, and then we are also working on shortening this time period between loan originator receiving the borrower payment and then sending money to us. But there again, we have to realize that in some of the countries, the international payments take even up to 4 days. So there's going to be some delay.
Days maybe is not an issue, but when it comes to weeks, then there is a problem.
Well, definitely, especially if it's very short-term loans, for sure.
Okay, then a couple of questions about due diligence. There was a situation where Mintos added a loan originator called Nexus and removed it only 3 days later. And as I understood that this has happened 3 times already with 2 others as well. One of them was InvestScore. Can you comment on these cases? Like what went wrong there?
I would say it was only Nexus, at least to my knowledge. So basically what we did, we connected them, and then after they started to post loans, we realized like additional risk factors which we realized are not something which we are comfortable with, and just remove them.
But shouldn't you have somehow figured these risk factors before? Or?
It was more related to the loans they issued. So they just issued the loans which are not something which we would be comfortable with.
So too high risk in the loans?
Too high, and the same, like we have to do anti-money laundering checks as well. So there's things which we have to check, and then the final borrowers are also, so we don't know, before we connect, of course we do all the due diligence and we check the loan performance, the loan portfolio, which checks specific loans, but in that specific case, basically they issued loan to somebody which we didn't think is, we didn't feel comfortable with actually investors funding that specific loans.
Okay. How often do you monitor loan originators, and what signs do you look for when you decide to change their rating?
It's real time, so all the loan originators are monitored real time. So what we have is, with all the loan originator, with every loan originator, we have API connection. So whenever they receive the borrower payment, we actually get the information on our website. So there's our risk team has certain red flags. If the current portfolio goes above this or falls below this, then there's a red flag, and we investigate. So that happens all the time on real time. And then it's real time is also not real time, but on the weekly, if not more, there's account managers which are in contact with loan originators if something is out of ordinary. So if it goes smoothly, so we don't. So it's all risk based. So also based on the ratings. So it's risk based for those which are lower ratings. We spend more time. For which higher ratings, less time. And also subject to the performance. And then we do have regular meetings with the loan originators. We go and discuss their funding needs. We discuss their business. So that happens. And then the risk team also, if necessary, they go and fly in and just work with the loan originator as well. So, and that's also, even for those which we have connected, for instance, our team was just in Mexico. We were talking with the new loan originators, but then we meet also our current loan originators and go through as well. So it's a constant, a lot of work. So in total, in both account managers, loan originator team, legal team, AML team, and risk team, we have about like 60-70 people working on that. So it's a lot of effort going into this, which is behind the scenes, which investors don't really see.
And still someone might think that you are not doing a very good job about it. I mean, there's alternative ratings, and Some investors like to check these originators themselves, like do some due diligence. They want to check the financial reports, and in some cases there is a big problem that they are not either in English or they are super old. Like recently there was a case where LF Tech added their report about 2018 only a couple of days ago. At the same time, Mogo has already published their 2019 numbers, so like a 1 year difference. Don't you think you should push these loan originators a bit more regarding this reporting?
We do our best. So we do our best to also persuade them that it's in their best interest to actually be more transparent. But obviously, there are different companies and different approaches. Some of them, I mean, all of them are private companies.
Yeah.
All of them are in very competitive space. So some of them, it's a very pragmatic approach. They say, sure, well, if I put something out there, the first thing what's going to happen is my competitor is going to go to Mintos and get all the information. So there's a balance between being transparent for a good reason and being transparent and being foolish actually when you actually put yourself at a disadvantage to your competitors. So there are many things which are there which basically maybe investors don't see day in, day out, and this is something what we have to take into account. The other thing is that what we receive, there's a lot of information. It's not only your annual report. Annual report is just catch-all, very high-level view.
Yeah.
For us, much more important is how the cohorts are performing, loan performance. What's the payoffs? What's the default rates? What happens with the regulation? What the market is talking like? Talking with the management and so forth. So there's a lot of like myriad of information which we get, and there's no. And we work with many different countries, different loan originators, and well, at some point, investors just have to trust that we do our job well, right? You cannot recheck, and it would be not possible to recheck each and every fact which we get on the table. So it's not possible. So the same, just going on the side, talking with them, seeing how the team is developing, how competent they are, what's their market situation, how regulation. A lot of factors, and this is why we need 200 people team. So all this team is deciphering all this information, and maybe there are some investors which by themselves alone can replicate what we do. I doubt so. So we need a lot of people just to go through all of this. So unfortunately, there's I doubt there is a good way to put all the information which we receive in a good, understandable and readable format to investors. And even if we would, then that will interest maybe 0.01% of investors who actually will go through and check.
For sure, yeah. Most won't do that. There was one question about GetBucks as one loan originator, that they had some issues. Lately there has been some positive news, but they still have late payments, and the rating hasn't changed at all. So should have it been changed at some point, or you don't think so?
I would have to ask the team specifically for specific loan originator in specific countries, and there's a lot of them. What we do when it comes to ratings is we do monitor them on quarterly basis, and then that's where we reach all of them. And then we do actually, if there are substantial events which we believe would trigger the change in the rating, then we would actually change it out of the order, right? So that's how our approach to the rating. To specific case, actually, for that I cannot really comment.
Okay. When can we expect to see Mintos report for 2019?
It should be the same as every other year, so a bit. I think it's until 30th of April 30, and until the end of the April. But we also are working on consolidated reports, and that's going to be later in the year. So it's basically statutory deadlines, and then whenever those deadlines approach, and also whenever we get the report and signed by our auditor EY, Ernst & Young, then we put it on the website. So the moment we get that will be the moment we publish on the website.
Okay, the last couple of questions. Do you have any changes planned for the Auto Invest tool? For Mintos, it seems like a good tool to get retail investors investing in loans that other investors might not be interested in. But I mean, recently when there had been some problems with some loan originators and some like investors just got stuck with bad loans, so there I guess were some unhappy investors, right?
I guess you mean Invest in Access, not Auto Invest. Invest in Access,
Sorry.
right? So
Exactly.
When it comes to Invest in Access, how we see this tool, it is really to get exposure to all of the loans which are on the marketplace. And then on top of that, you get much better liquidity, or at least you get liquidity without much hassle. So you don't have to go on secondary market, try to sell, put the price, and so forth. So this tool is really meant to be very simple and very easy to use tool. Actually, a lot of investors use it. So of course, it's not all the tools should apply to all the people who want to invest. There are going to be people who want to spend much more time on that and research like every loan originator, loan performance, whatnot, and countries and ratings, so all of that. And then on top of that, yes, they might be able to get perhaps a bit bigger return than just going as an index of all the loans out there. But then there are people who say, I don't care if I get 12% or 10% or whatever. Now today, I guess Invest in Access is 9.77%. Yeah. They say it's fine. I don't want to spend that much time on that. So there's going to be people who use certain tools such as Invest in Access. There's going to be people in the middle who use Auto Invest. They set up and forget, or just follow it on a less regular basis. And then we have investors who do manual investing, and they do it like every day and for many hours, and that's fine. So what we are doing, we are building the tools for different use cases, right? And then when it comes to investing access, sure, it's maybe not meant for those hardcore users who are ready to spend a lot of time. So that was not the intention of Invest in Access, but that's a good tool for somebody who comes in the marketplace. And even though they get because they get the index, sure, they're going to get all of the loans there, and there might be the cases where some of them are not performing. But if we look at the portfolio basis, they're tiny fraction of the portfolio, so that's because it is index. So I would say different tools, different use cases.
Okay, got it. And what can we expect in next 6 months in terms of new features or updates?
So today we launched the mobile app, so that's something which we worked. So we are, of course, it is version 1.0. There's a lot of work which we are putting already now, and we're gonna continue updating it, and it's gonna. We believe that at some moment it's gonna become the primary way of interacting with Mintos, at least for many investors. And already today, well, I've been beta tester myself, so actually I tend to use a mobile app, checking what's the balance and so forth. And then the initial feedback is very good. So mobile app is for sure, and then subject to us getting the necessary permissions the moment we get, and it should be anytime soon. We're gonna roll out the bank account numbers, and then the next step will be Mintos card on top of it. So that's something in the immediate future.
Okay. Well, thank you for taking your time, and good luck.
Thank you.
And launching all the updates.
Pleasure to have you here.
Thanks.
Okay.